Hi, welcome to Crosses Part 1. I'm not on camera this video due to a hideous cold sore on my upper lip, so on to the video. This is how I made 6 hard maple crosses with red resin hearts on small cherry bases, 4 for one customer and 2 for another. The customer buying 4 of these bought a single one a little over a year ago. Here's a picture of the first one. 1 1/8 inches thick, front to back, 9 inches high without the hill, and 5.5 inches side to side, finished with gloss lacquer. I needed to purchase a thick piece of hard maple stock, and what was available that day was some 2 inches thick, 8/4 in lumber industry terms, hard maple, with some sticker stain on it that I was sure would disappear after removing about a 1/2 inch of material from each side with the planer. I was wrong. The sticker stain wasn't the only stain either. Consequently, the fronts of all crosses were marked and remained there throughout the process. I ran the blanks I had cut through the planer over and over until they were just a little under an inch and a half. I went back to my journal to check on the height and width dimensions of the first one, as these were going to be roughly the same size. Next, I wanted to make sure that the edges were perpendicular to the face of the blank, so the tabletop joiner was mounted on the, you guessed it, the tabletop. Ta-da! Multiple passes were necessary as I was not taking much of a bite with each pass, just like the planer. Next, it was time to lay out the crosses on the blanks. Of course, math was involved and the sticker stain was avoided. I also used a template I had made to position the hearts on each one. I've never been able to draw a heart by hand that was anywhere near balanced, so I used the laser engraver to burn through a single layer of cardstock, adjusting the size until I felt it was appropriately proportioned. The next step in the process was to cut the crosses out on the bandsaw. I stayed on the scrap side of the line, knowing that I was going to get closer with a chisel and sanding. I wanted to get all the machining done before the sanding, so the drill press was used next to make a hole for the scroll saw blade. Now, if you were to talk scroll sawing with most people, they would probably think of some very complex work on a thin piece of stock. This thick maple took a while to cut, but you have to let the tool do the work. I cut all 6 of these hearts out with one blade. Okay, who wants to watch a lot of sanding? No one? I hear you. Me neither. Suffice it to say, there was plenty of sanding. I used one of my rubber sanding blocks and went through some sandpaper. To sand the 4 ends, I used a circular motion, maintaining level as much as possible. I didn't want to round off the corners if I could help it. To get in close and keep even pressure, I used a putty knife between folded sandpaper. It works pretty good. I didn't want to round the edges over there either. I used a sharp chisel to shave down to the line when I needed to. Did I mention this was hard maple? Yeah, that's some hard maple. Next up was cleaning the heart cutouts. The bandsaw left lots of ridges and I needed to smooth them out. Ragged, sharp edges where the red resin meets the hard maple just wasn't the look I was going to from a design perspective. Of course, I used a Dremel, and I like to film using 2 cameras as much as possible to have more to work with during the editing stage. It didn't take long to clean them up and to kind of smooth them off. The really important part was going to be the front, where the heart shape meets the hard maple. So once the hearts were cleaned up, I coated the inside of them with resin to seal the surface. Without sealing the walls of the heart, I would have run the risk of having the resin penetrate the maple, especially on the open ends of the vertical grain, while at the same time, air would migrate from the wood into the resin. Seemed like a no-brainer to me. The extra resin I colored and poured into one of the ball molds. Once the resin was dry, I meticulously applied a layer of 2-inch carton sealing tape to the front of the crosses. This would be the bottom of the crosses while filling with resin. Before I did the resin, I built a hot melt glue wall around the hearts on the back, which is now the top, so I could overfill the mold. Resin usually shrinks a little as it cures, in my experience. For this project, I am using Total Boat's high-performance epoxy mixed 2-to-1 with their slow hardener. I always mark the ratio column and levels on my mixing cups because mistakes can be made, so why not reduce the chance? Once the proper proportions were produced, it was time to add the Raging Rose pigment powder from Black Diamond Pigment. On the first cross, I used some scarlet pigment, and when the light shined through from the back, there was an orange tint to it, hence the Raging Rose. The torch was brought out to pop the surface bubbles in the resin, and the crosses were left on the work table to cure. Prior to cleaning the hot melt glue off and sanding, I used some of my DIY bench blocks to hold the crosses on the table. I should have held that first block a little better. I used to work for a piece rate, so I've studied workplace efficiency a bit to increase my take-home pay. Sometimes it's faster to do the same process to all the pieces prior to the next process. Think the standard production line. Other times, like in a shop setting, if all the tools are within reach, it might be more efficient completing a predetermined set of processes on each piece prior to starting on the next. The belt sander was used to remove stock down to the level of the resin wherever necessary. There's not a thickness target that necessarily has to be met, so down to the resin without rounding off any corners was the goal. At that level, the random orbit palm sander was brought out until I was happy with them. These pieces will need to be handled and machined more, so finish sanding was not required. Well, that's where we are right now on this project, guys. The new target, my one and only time target on YouTube right now, the new target is one video every 2 weeks like clockwork. Finishing the crosses is the target for 2 weeks from now. I'm going to try to record this voiceover, create the video, and publish this in the next 7 hours. I also have to go get a haircut and eat. I'm pretty proud of the channel intro. It's my first attempt. Here it is on the way out. Take care.